All right. Welcome back, everybody, to conversation number 113. Today, we're talking about bridging the great disconnect in all the different areas and the challenges and potentials. Okay, time to laugh with Ola. Did I do it?
That's good. That's
Oh, it's not.
spot
It's
on.
terrible.
That is spot on. I'm not lying.
All right, but before we start, as always, let's thank our sponsors, starting with Conductrix, who have been with us from the very beginning. Thank you, Nate, Ezekiel, Matt, Ashley, and the entire team at Conductrix. Thank you so much for supporting the TLC. We also want to thank our other TLC sponsors that sponsor the newsletter, starting again with Conductrix, as well as Growthbook and Ask Why. Thank you all so much for providing your thought leadership to the community. And as of last month, Amplitude joined as a sponsor who, with their new acquisition of StatSig, have started sponsoring happy hours. And we'll talk about that in a moment. The first is August 27th. Again, we'll talk about that in just a second. And as well, thank you for Convert. They sponsor the Conversations channel. Oh, sorry, fly just hit me. If you haven't participated in asking and answering great questions on the Conversations channel, please go do so. It's a great way to learn more about your fellow optimizers. And you might win a little cash along the way. And last, thank you, Eddie Aguilar and Blazing Growth. So, before I introduce our speaker, I have a few quick announcements and reminders. Optimizers Conference is West, is March 3rd through the 5th. We've already announced, and I think everybody knows that it is in Santa Cruz. You can scan that QR code or go to optimizersconference.com. This is the former Experimentation Island, or as Tone likes to say, the conference formerly known as Experimentation Island. It is the US version of Conversion Hotel, and we've announced our first speakers, Colin McFarland, formerly of Netflix, now at Microsoft, and Shalvi Waklu, formerly of Strava and Meta. You can see a little bit about their talks on the website. And of course, just like always, we'll have the unconference sessions, which means you can be a speaker too. So scan the QR code. We are currently in the super early bird phase, which means if you're in-house, your tickets are $15.95, and if you're agency, there's a $500 extra cost there. So there's your QR codes. Those tickets are on sale now. Also, like I mentioned, Amplitude and StatSig are hosting a TLC partnership happy hour with Publicis Sapient in Chicago on August 27th. Limited seats, but it's completely free, even parking, and that includes everything. Like I said, if you drive, parking, drinks, food, the full event, everything is free. Scan the QR code and you fill out the registration, but registration is required to get in the building. So scan the QR code, come. We're going to do round tables, unconference style. Each table will have a different topic. You'll get to know folks in the industry in the Chicago area. In the broader Chicago area, we have people coming in from Columbus and Milwaukee and, of course, the greater Chicago area. So come see what it's all about. Get to know your fellow optimizers. So let's talk about our speaker and why he's here. I love having new speakers join us, as you all know, and I was really excited when Ole became part of the community a few months ago. Fresh blood. So, new perspectives, new experiences, new ideas for us to dig into together. Ole and I, Ola, sorry, share something that gives us an immediate connection. We're both conference organizers. He is the founder of Conversion Boost, which is now in its 13th year, like Conversion Hotel is in the Netherlands. And he understands both the joy and the occasional chaos of bringing curious people together to learn from one another. He also has a Danish podcast about CRO, and he's creating conversations around experimentation is a big part of what he does. He has spent the past 12 years as a freelance consultant, Me too. Working across just about every type of online business and helping major brands like Echo, Solar, and Gani. Is it Gani or Gani? Gani?
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever.
It's probably
Uh,
Gani, I would
Gani
guess.
improve their digital experiences through experimentation. His background is in usability and user research, subjects he's also taught for 6 years at IT University Copenhagen. I also taught at university. We're like the same person on different countries. It's really
I
cool.
think we finish each other's sandwiches.
I know, right? It's really cool. What I especially appreciate about his perspective is that he encourages us to look beyond individual pages, screens, and experiments. He thinks about the entire journey and reminds us that no interaction or decision happens in isolation. Customers bring their goals, their expectations, their motivations, and anxieties with them. God, isn't that true? Even when our organizations divide their journeys among different teams and departments. When I worked at Dell, Michael Dell once asked, "Why is my org chart on the homepage?" Exactly. That is the heart of what he calls the great disconnect. It is a fresh and important way to think about experimentation culture, cross-functional collaboration, and the opportunities we miss when we optimize individual moments without seeing how they connect. I'm thrilled to have you here. And I hope everybody will join me in giving you a very warm welcome. So let me pass the screen to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for welcoming me to the community and to invite me today. I'm very happy about that. Let me just see if I can do this right. Am I doing it right? Yeah, I forgot you had that great slide. I can skip the first 10 slides now because you basically just, my whole life story, which I don't really want to share at all. I normally just ask people to skip that, but I think for context sometimes it's nice to know who is this guy, what's he working with. So I have just a few slides about that. Otherwise, I just want to get cracking on my story here. Thank you for joining us. Today I'm in Copenhagen in Denmark. It's 6 o'clock here, over on the other side of the big ocean for those in the States. And I'm super excited about being allowed to talk about this a little bit slightly different this different deck here, which is not so sort of like standard experimentation, but more kind of a beginning of a conversation that I'm hoping that we will have all together about some of the conundrums of our business. Because you guys are probably like experts like crazy, so why would I want to talk about significance or experimentation? That would just be weird. But anyways, my day job, I work in a company called Impact. I'm a zero lead. Sounds like we're a big team. We're not, but we do have quite a big company that runs a lot of sort of deep tech e-coms scattered all over Europe. And we do a lot of like re-platforming and redesign and sort of deep tech work for a lot of big e-coms, especially B2C and B2B. And whenever anyone talks about sort of optimizing or improving or testing or experimentation, they mention my name, and that's what I do. I also run the conversion boost. Just quickly about that, like 13 years. Yes, that's me. They're being silly. We tried to ham it up a little bit. Last year, I was a boxer. I was fighting. I was fighting for better and faster decision making. Yeah, which is in experimentation. That guy there, maybe some of you know him, one of those Dutch people. So we have a lot of people talking at this conference year after year. That's really good fun, and I love doing that. And that's also how I know Ton Wessling, for instance. He's been there speaking quite a number of years. And then there's the podcast, but that's not so exciting. Just to say that I spend a lot of time talking about this, because that's the only thing I know. So I interview people about why is it that no one does experimentation, or why don't they get it? Like everybody else in the business, like we don't understand why the others don't get it. So I have podcasts in Danish about that. All right, that's quickly about me. Yes, like you said, Kelly, I have a usability background. I think that's relatively important for what I'm going to say now. That's where I'm coming from. So right now, I'm working in e-commerce, and I come from like a UX, UI, and usability, sort of like the user's always right advocate kind of thing. That's where I'm from, and that's not everybody in our business that comes from that area. And sometimes that's interesting to meet people with a different background, maybe more like performance based or even marketing kind of background. But anyways. I'm going to take you guys on a little journey here, And the idea is that we'll together will reach the understanding of the great disconnect. And then we can talk about what does that mean? Because I think more than anything else, this is just a sort of like an understanding or a worldview that I've come to that I think is important. And I don't have all the answers. I have examples and I have problems and challenges, but I don't necessarily have all the answers. You might actually have some more answers than me. We'll see. But let's just start somewhere to get to the goal of the great disconnect, to understand what that is. So, what do I do for a living? Well, I answer questions like this. How do we get more visitors to convert on our website, on our e-com? And I think that because I work in e-commerce, there's a standard way of looking at a website. Like, okay, you have traffic that comes in here, and then it go through these steps, this funnel, and then out comes like conversions and things we sell. And even though that's very sort of like a simple model, and even though that's not how it works at all, it just makes sense in our brain. So for now, I'm not going to try and build a model that is an exact replica of the truth or the world. I'm just going to use this very well-known principle of how a website or web shop works to sort of like show you what the issue is. Now, I want to say that we have these people, our users, the people that buy our product, the ones we think are important because they actually put the money in the bank, so to speak. We find those people really important, and they have a number of decisions that we really want to work with. And I think that's where I want to start. I want to say that, okay, so through this sort of journey from someone that sees an ad, goes to the web shop that I'm working with, and then end out as a customer, they have a journey here. And that's important because they've got these decision points along the way. So they decide to actually click the advert in the social media. They end up in the shop on some page, and then they go, that's interesting. That's exactly what I need, funnily enough. And then they click on that, and then they go through the checkout, and they do all these things that we measure along the way. And I think it makes sense to think of this as a user journey. Nothing special about that. And I know user journeys are not like this straightforward, but for now, we're just going to look at it as a number of decisions that are made in a row. Yeah. So that's the sort of the world we're in. And that's what we're trying to improve, I would say. And I think what's interesting is that someone like me, I know a lot specifically about, okay, so a user gets to a certain point and I have to take them from that decision, push them forward into whatever funnel. And I have methods and ways to do that. I think we as optimizers or experimenters, we know a lot about human decision making, which is good because at the end of all this, I think it's all about human decisions. So to me, and that might just be my worldview, it's all about how do I get people to make that decision? How do I get them to say yes again and again and again to what I'm doing? And I have my tools. Some of you may, remember the lift model from Wider Funnel. A lot of people use that. I made my own model because I'm a consultant. I can't use everybody else's model. I need to use my own model. Yeah. So this is my model. But basically, I know that it's about creating relevance and value in order to push user motivation. I know that I can use different boosters like working with anchoring or priming or cognitive bias. I have that all in my toolbox. But interestingly enough, about this is that's just one decision, and I think that's quite interesting to remember when I move forward into this little story. Now, I want to give you an example of a situation that got me started with all this thinking about the disconnect. And this is a report that came out from OmniConvert a few months ago. And I may have some questions about, the validity of these sort of like industry surveys. And that's just fine. We all learned at university to be critical about the sources and this and that. But anyways, that report was really interesting to me because the numbers in this report were so eye-opening. And even if they're not true, even if they're just halfway true, they are still crazy numbers. So here's a crazy number in my book. 97% of 7,000 stores across the whole world show every visitor the same landing page regardless of which ad brought them there. I think to me that is just ridiculous. I use the word ridiculous because I think that is truly ridiculous. And the reason why I think this is ridiculous is that I've seen so many places where you can work on landing pages and you can actually get more people to convert. And so it just to me seems like, really? Can that be true? And why is that? So why is that so many companies work like this? And I think this is the first part of the the best example, or the first example rather, of a disconnect. And so, what's the disconnect here? Well, the disconnect is that we have some people that we show some advert, some marketing piece of material in one of these channels, and these are the same channels for all e-coms, anyways. These days, maybe they've added TikTok last year, but otherwise it's just the same old email, same old Google Ads, same old Instagram, same old everything. And we show them something, and then we send them, apparently 97% of companies just send them to the same page. And then I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty crazy, because wait a minute, the users don't like just have individual decisions. They have a user journey. They might start with a goal out here somewhere, and then they might end up with like, did I actually buy the product that met my goal, or whatever that connects these decision points. And then so if according to this report, we just have a big scissor and we just go like, okay, we have something over here, we have something over here, with a complete disregard to the connection of these decision points. And I think that's a really good example of what will become the great disconnect. So I've, through the years, read so many case stories about matching messages, and there's a name for it. It's called message match. It's like you can Google it. It's easy. And what is it about? It's just about connecting the advert or where you come from to where you send people. Just, remember good old Flint McGoughlin before he ended up in the bad books. This is one of his things, the value proposition, yeah, the force of the value proposition. Just like repeating the message, like show people, if you tell them you give them 15%, remind them that they're going to have 15% and give them the goddamn 50%. It's a relatively simple principle. And so I think for a lot of companies, just creating more different landing pages, or trying out landing pages, or doing experimentation with landing pages, or trying out different landing pages or different campaigns. It's so easy. And apparently, according to this study, and according to my own experience, it very rarely happens. So the question is, why is that, and what does that mean? And so it also got me thinking. Wait a minute! Not only do we cut it up here in the decision making, but think about all these terms and words we use in our business that are really made up of something where the user comes from somewhere and goes somewhere, or has a setup of something and then a payoff, or tension and release. That is so deeply part of human decision making that it's really, really interesting once you start digging into it. And we know all these terms like priming, anchoring, commitment, consistency. We have all the heroes in Kahneman and Cialdini and BJ Fogg and all those people. And what are they talking about? A lot of them talking about setting something up and then sort of harvesting the payoff. Yeah. Anchoring, it's all about how do you anchor correctly. And then when you actually have the price, you compare it to the anchor. And so again, it just proves to me that that's something completely wrong when we do these disconnects. All right. So once you start, that was just an example of a really obvious disconnect that you've probably all seen. I've seen a lot, and that I can see that's still out there. Now, once you start doing that, I start thinking back in my experience and go like, wait a minute, this reminds me of some other conversations I've had through the years. Like, not only do we have these conversations between the people responsible for the marketing channels and the people responsible for let's say, the user experience or the experience designers, we also have that discussion between, especially in e-com, between the content people, the ones that do the blog post and all that stuff, and the people that look after the products. And so one massive disconnect in e-com is that companies are really bad at connecting the two. And so we do a lot of things like adding more content to PLPs, or like product listing pages, where you have you use some of the product cards, you add like USPs, or you add a blog post, or you add a little video connecting the two, or because they're disconnected. And also, where I work, we have the eternal discussions about how do we get things from like our Zero backlog into the Jira backlog with the developers. Like lots of fights about who owns what. And then you figure out that the people that look after the logistics, sending things and selling things, they only look at certain numbers, but they don't know what's going on the website. And the list keeps going. And that's really interesting, because once you start thinking about this, you understand these are different teams. They all have different tools. I have my heroes. They have other heroes. I went to university and looked into like usability. Marketing people didn't go to that university and they didn't study the same people. They have different goals. They have different managers, and these managers are fighting over different turf, and they have different processes. So the very well established development environment, they have their own tools with their stand-ups and their manifestos and all that. And the UXers have their own world, and us here, I'm hawking you. We have an experimentation. We have our own things that we care about, and it's really interesting because they overlap like crazy, but they don't necessarily match. And more importantly, we have different metrics and we have different things that we have to achieve. And so once we start looking at the marketing people, what's their connection to, for instance, user behavior metrics? Well, maybe none. And so this is a really good example of disconnects. And this goes across if we look down on the graph here, that goes completely across the decision points of the human decision making. So every time we have these disconnects, we totally disconnect the user journey. So that's why I coined it the great disconnect. Do we have sound? Did you hear that? That's a great disconnect. It's a big thing. So, but wait, this is like back in the day. But wait, there's even more. There's even more, because the great disconnect also has a vertical axis. So we have the user journey axis where we disconnect everything across there with different teams and different people. But there's also another axis. So back to the web shop, where I live, where I do my daily business. So one good question would be, and this is a little bit hidden, I can't even see what it says behind the thing, but it probably says something about, we want to be data-driven, yeah? So we have these companies and they run these websites, and now I'm just going to talk about what happens on the website because that's where I work, and I don't know all the other areas so well. So let's talk about just the disconnect on the actual website. So we want to be data-driven. So what does that mean? So I show up and I say, well, data-driven to me means we need to understand more about what your users do on the site, their behavior, because their behavior, I know that with the decision points, I know how to change the behavior, and the behavior change is what I can see in my testing, for instance, gives us more, gives us growth, gives us more revenue. So I want to look down into the behavior of the users and understand what they do, and then I want to connect that to what we decide to do on the site. And the thing is, so many companies and the ones of you that work with data, you've seen this a million times. Everybody's always so disappointed once they start working with this, and just to get past the GTM setup or the analytics setup, that's the first hurdle because it's always buggy and horrible. But anyways, let's just pretend the setup is correct. So many companies, if you ask them, what do you know about user behavior on your site? Because user behavior is important because, like I said before, it leads to the conversions, and maybe they will go, oh, but we can see that in GA4. We collect that in GA4. Well, have you ever looked, or what reports are you looking at? And then it becomes a little blah, 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 because no one actually does that, because there's no one's job. Very often it's nobody's job. So in some companies you have people that do data analysis, and you have people that are responsible for customer experience. For a lot of companies, like with making millions of dollars, there's no one's responsibility really. And they don't really have anything once they start looking. What do they have? They have stuff like this. They have add to basket rate, and they have the stand-up setup, and they can see where people drop off. But the interesting thing is they have no idea, well, then what? So 84% did not add to basket. Then what? What did you learn? What do you know? And so this is a massive problem, I think, in my industry, that so many companies can't actually connect the dots. So that's the vertical disconnect. The thing is, once you want to look at user behavior and understand user behavior on your site, and there are people that do that for a living. I'm one of them. So I look at this stuff. I look at session recording. I look at all this human behavior data. I ask them to collect more data and look at that. But that doesn't mean that ends up in the strategy. So the other disconnect is that for some remarkable reason, most companies don't have a connection between their strategy and the footprints, the data footprints, the human behavior on their site. They don't know. So they either guess or hope or think, or I don't know, whatever, just like when people, just like the gut feeling when you implement whatever you like, the new navigation that you love so much. It's a little bit the same thing. So now we also have a vertical disconnect that we can talk about. Because what's the problem here? Well, the problem here is that the strategy has nothing to do with actually what's actually happening on the site right now. And I'm part of or quite a lot of like re-platforming or moving to a different platform or having a new design, this and that. And then companies look at what did users do on our site until we chose to do this redesign. And most of the time, they don't know. And they say, oh, next time we need to know. Next time we do a redesign, we need to collect this data. So let me sort of open up that box a little bit and talk about, how do I try to help this bridge this kind of gap? So I think there are two approaches, and this is not rocket science. It makes total sense that either you go from the strategy down and say like, okay, this is what we need to achieve. So some companies, a lot of them just go like, okay, double the revenue next year, whatever. They just always need to grow. That's basically what we do in capitalism. Yeah, it needs to be more next year. So we have a strategy. Maybe we open that up and say, oh, next year we want to do like omni-channel or subscription or whatever, and then we can open that up and say, okay, in order to achieve that, what metrics and the things do we need to move? And in order to do that, what sort of like data do we need to see happening on the site? And in order to do that, what sort of human behavior are we looking for, or do we want to improve? That sounds like something an optimizer could do. Yeah, like looking at, okay, so we need to increase add to baskets. Okay, so what tools do we have, in order to do that? And we can look at patterns, or we can look at, libraries, or we can do all sorts of things in order to suggest things that we want to test. And then we can say, okay, if we do that, then we can see if we can create more add to baskets, and that will go into the revenue per user KPI, whatever, and then that follows the strategy. Or the other way around, you can go like, okay, we have these data sets. What can they tell us about what's happening on the site, and what can we use that for, and how can we use that to inform our strategy? So that's working the other way, and that's also like an approach I think some companies do. If they do a good job, they go like, oh, we know this about our users. We're learning this from testing or from doing analysis, and we use that to inform our strategy. So that's maybe what we think about when we talk about being data driven. All right, so I'm just going to show you just like a sort of simplified example of work I've been doing with some companies to try and bridge this gap, trying to sort of get them on board on this. These are companies that are not that mature when it comes to sort of like this sort of thing. Doesn't mean that they are small or they're not worldwide, but this means the teams are not so big and they're a little bit immature when it comes to this sort of thing. So they need this sort of help. These are also the companies that are completely ripe for like a zero track, for like an A/B testing track, because they're ready. That's where they are. So that's where we meet them actually, like as an agency. So some of you surely know about OKRs. Very simple: objectives and key results. Is basically a way to translate the strategy into different objectives, and each objective will have a key result. And a key result, say, if you work in experimentation, could be that we need to grow revenue per visitor, for instance. That could be a good KPI to have in ecom, at least, because it's a combination of conversion rate and average order value. So it speaks both into like getting people to do stuff and do it more, and then also do more of it, so to speak. So that's one I like. So if we do that, then we can open that up and say, okay, so our key results could be something like this. This is just something I vibe coded based on GA4. So these are just numbers. They could also have them in Power BI or Google Data Studio. Have them anywhere. I'm sure lots of you have been part of building dashboards, or you've been part of working with companies where they have no idea where to look and everybody looks at a different dashboard. That's also a very common disease. But if you can get them to start say, okay, what are our data sources? And you can start opening up the data for them. So instead of looking just in GA4, you can start doing stuff that is a little bit beyond GA4, which is more dashboard-like, about having KPIs and what was the change. Here's our key result, and then we can look at how is it developing month over month or year over year, and we can open that. We can set some goals, and we can start opening that up and say, okay, but like I said before, revenue per visitor is also conversion rate and average order value, and what are they made up of? And then we have these, I call them gatekeeper metrics, which are closer and closer and closer to actual human behavior. Yeah. So the conversion rate is not a very good measure for human behavior, both because it's affected by so many things, but also because like there are things inside the conversion rate. Yeah. You can open those up and say, okay, but converting actually means getting them to go through all these different steps, and you need to improve all of them. And then you can start looking at, okay, so what's the relationship, say, between add to basket and human behavior? Because now we have the connection from our OKR down through our metrics here, our key results, down to, let's say, add to basket. And then you can, this is also something I vibe coded, you can sort of like, you can go on the internet and find all these different like libraries of activities. Something that also I think big conversion agencies will do. They'll have a library of things they've tried and they will say, okay, this is a success, so let's just do that first on the side. And you can pick something like, okay, sticky add to cart button on mobile. Yeah, okay, so that's a classic like thing you could try out. And what does that do? Well, that actually, if that works well, and it will give you more add to baskets. And then we can start having a strategy about, okay, this is the key result we want to achieve, and these are the patterns that we would need to test in order to create more of, you can see the connection here. And so I think this is something that is not so easy to do in organizations, a bit of sort of change management, but it is a way to say, let's try and connect humans and what they do and what we show them and the experience to where we want to go with this company. So it's not just like, okay, we need to earn the double amount next year and we need to do experimentation. Go. That's, can be connected to. So, so what I also did is, and that's just like a little sort of like a little reminder, a little extra thing is like, okay, so companies need to move away from just like tracking what's above the fold. So it's interesting, of course, to track all these things about, so what do people click, do they change size, do they click on the different variations? We need that, of course. But what I've been doing, and I just want to add that here, is like looking at, okay, but there's more to it than that, because if we only look at those sort of final interactions, we only see the end result. We only see the add to basket. But add to basket is not just a yes or no. It's like an end result of like a piece of the journey. So something we've been working on with the companies is like, okay, we need to know more. So what do we need? What do we need to know? We need to know about how do we engage people? Well, remember the decision-making model before. We engage people by thinking about relevance and value and reducing friction and anxiety. What tools do we have on our page to build those things? So let's talk about, let's say, reviews. So what does reviews work well, and what do reviews do for decision making? And so we can get closer and closer to what's important for the actual user in their decision making process. Which elements do what, and what sort of metrics can be moved by doing different things. And I think that's really interesting to try and get companies to make that deeper dive into the user behavior data and help them do that. And I think actually just GA4 is actually a place you can do that. So that's where I start and trying to have them grow that part. We call these blocks experience blocks, and then we can start talking about, what do people see? When are they in the viewport? Can they actually, what have they seen? So not so much how much do they scroll, but what do they see, and how long are they looking at it? Of course, we can't tell that 100% because we don't know if people actually just held up the phone. But we can try and get close. And do they interact with these different parts? So we get more sort of granular data. I still miss good tools to have granular GA4 type data. I think with AI, us experimenters, we get the power back to sort of pull that data out of GA4 and do our own stuff. I think that's super cool. And then we can start, I said, get vibing. We can start, it's so simple. You can export these things from Google Analytics so easily, and you can feed them into your AI and just start saying like, just give me these reports, or look, compare these numbers, or month over month, just how are these things moving? And you can build your own. I think these days you can just build your own specific tools for your own for your own pleasure, basically. And so to me, this is an example of one way of working, of trying to connect connect the things. And so this is not pretty, I admit it. Maybe it's version 1.0, but this is the great disconnect. I think this is the environment that I'm working in, and so yeah. So not round of applause, but a little pause. So that's the great disconnect. And so what's interesting about the great disconnect is like, I think that us, and I'm thinking we're all experimenters here or optimizers. This is this is good news for us to some degree because we fit well into this. So even if we think of ourselves with like sort of like T personality or something, where we know a little bit about everything, we are a very good crowd to connect these things because we know a lot about human behavior and testing and data. We also want to talk about where we're going strategically. I think we're very good at communicating with different groups because we have our optimization or A/B testing process, which like includes developers and UXers and designers and stakeholders and product owners, because you have to, because you can't run A/B testing without talking to those people because they are all involved in your process, or you feed them stuff, or you feed them results. So naturally, we are in the middle of this. That's what we say. I don't think everybody agrees, but I just think that's important. So the reason why I say that is because I think this is an opportunity. And I think the example before with the message match is a really good example of where you can actually, unless you already have, especially if you work in e-com, you can reach out to people on the marketing part or the content part and say, let's talk a little bit about, what are you tracking? What metrics are you looking at? What metrics am I looking at? What's the relationship between what you're doing over there and what I'm doing over here? Somebody needs to pick up that conversation because it doesn't start automatically. Like I said before, these are different departments. They could be in different countries for all I know. So I think as an optimizer, I think it's great to go in and say, look, I'm used to optimizing this, but it's really important for me what happens over here. Maybe we should start something up. Where are you guys on A/B testing? If you start talking to marketing people about A/B testing, it's a different game. It's not the same type of A/B testing. They might be testing on a subset of email users. I need to test on all traffic, otherwise I never get anywhere. So just having those conversations. So I think experimentation culture, sense of excellence, all that speaks into the great disconnect. And I think this is something that's very exciting to someone like me to battle in organizations. And so I'm going to end my little rant here because I think my time is also a little up. is that I just wanna have a few end slides here, and we can sort of open up the discussion, please. But so what does this mean? So in my world, when I do this presentation for different groups of people, I say to them the disconnect is just it's bad for your customers because the disconnect is in your customer user journey. You're disconnecting your customer's journey, and once you start connecting it, you can reap the benefits. So the thing is and that's where this all comes from, is if it's bad for your customers, it's bad for your business because your business is your customers. Those decisions, you need to control them. You need to take charge of them basically, and move the needle there. The annoying part is that you are part of the disconnect. I normally point at people, you, and you. You are all part of the disconnect, and so am I. We are part of the disconnect. This is the world we live in. This is the culture we built around digital development. And that's why I think I'm battling it, especially in Denmark. We have so few companies having a zero track or having A/B testing track. It's ridiculous. It's like one out of 100. And I think it's a cultural thing. It's just because they're not used to that. Companies are just used to doing whatever they like and hope for the best. And they've been growing since they started, so why would they? So we're all part of the disconnect. So this concerns all of us, and then that's why we need to start talking about this in the projects we're in. I think we can reduce the effects of disconnect if you actually try, and I don't think it's so difficult. I've given a few examples here of nothing that is none of that is rocket science at all. I just I'm not a Google Analytics expert. I'm not a data analyst. I just use my common sense. And I think it's an opportunity for people like me and like you, maybe, that if others don't, and I don't think they do, because I don't think I've ever heard anyone come to me and say, how do we connect these two? And so it's an opportunity. And opportunities are yummy. We all know that. I think solutions will be custom built right now, at least in the space we're in right now. But I think it's great fun. I think you've all started working with AI. And this is just a really, really great part of it because it's like working with data and having AI do things for you and analyze and show you stuff, which is super cool. So to me, AI, the most important thing about AI is like power back to the creative people. I feel a little bit like when we were doing Flash back in the, I don't know, before the new century. and everything was just animations, and you can do all really cool stuff. And then suddenly you had to do action script in order to do stuff. And so it all went to developers. Or like doing HTML in the beginning, you could build websites, and then suddenly it was way too advanced. And then so we completely lost the directness between your creativity and the technology. And now it's back. It's back because we can control technology. You can code whatever. Just say the word. I think that's so cool. The other day, someone said to me, and this is my final little point, that's because all the employees need to think like a CTO, because he was a company owner. And I said to him, you're being so naive because you can never get your employees to think like a CTO. But I had to apologize afterwards because I was being a bit harsh, because actually his point was really, really good. The thing is, of course, every employee won't sit and think like a CTO, but the point he was trying to make is that the CTO thinks about the relationship between the business and the money and the users, and that's what he wanted his employees to take more responsibility for the actual numbers. But I think maybe what we need to say is we need to take responsibility, yes, but maybe we should take responsibility for certain metrics or certain user behavior metrics, and then uh, we can become a hero. And the reason why I say become a hero is that because I don't think anyone is doing it right now. So I think you can create success for yourself by saying, look, I'm taking total responsibility for this key metric all the way down to the human behavior. And normally I say, then you get a raise because you create results. Yes. All right. That's it. That's the great disconnect. So more than giving you, I think Kelly, you almost said like, Ole's going to give you all the answers. He's not. He just gave you more challenges and more problems. But I wanted to create that image for you, and hopefully you will take it with you into the world. And I really love if you want to connect with me. We're connected, of course, in the community. Otherwise, on LinkedIn, feel free to do that. Thank you for the time.
Leave that up. Um, Florent just posted a really great comment about the way he connects with others as a behavioral scientist, which I
Yes.
love and is also something that I've done. Um, I personally noted something that you didn't mention that I think is more important than ever. You talked about us all being T-shaped. June Dershowitz did a research thing where she asked a bunch of people in the analytics space to fill out a survey about, after she did a talk here, and somebody asked a question afterwards, do we think we need to become more T-shaped in the age of AI? And because of AI, do we need to learn more of the tangential spaces? And one of the things that came out of that was we needed to become actually more, I think she called it comb shaped. We needed to get a little bit deeper in the areas around us and learn more. And it led me down the path of learning more about SEO and accessibility
Yeah.
because of AI search and the impacts it's having on experimentation and the changing demographics of the people who are coming, shall we say, pre-qualified and potentially impatient when they land on our websites. And all this work we've done optimizing journeys, and then a growing percentage of traffic is arriving. They don't want to be persuaded. They're already persuaded, or they're getting disqualified before they ever get there. And accessibility and SEO, that's how they're going to find us. So,
Mm.
and I don't know anything about them. So I just want to call out, we need to go talk to our friends in accessibility and SEO, because if we're not doing those things right, then AI search is never going to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yet
Oh,
another great example of different areas that need to be combined for, greater success, and the issue of living in your own silo for better and for worse, yeah, that's it. That's
we
a
can't
good
afford
point.
to do it anymore.
I think we had someone at the office the other day talking about surfers and divers. I've never heard that before, but that he was more like, okay, some people like to sort of like be across, and they're the surfers. They're the ones that sort of skid across all these topics, and they want to talk about, they want to talk about growth, and they want to talk about all that, strategy and all that. And then the divers are like, that's that dude over there. He does that and only that,
Yes.
and then the challenge was like, but they need to talk to each other and they need to understand the same things. And, so again, so yeah, I think it's interesting about this whole way of thinking and that's why I say like the disconnect is real and it's there and we're all part of it. So this it's a I think one of the reasons why this talk has resonated well with other people I spoke to is like they immediately go, oh yes, because that's every day for everybody to some degree, yeah. But I just think it's really wildly interesting in the sense that I work with I try to get people to convert basically. So am I really the only one who's interested in getting people from all the way, not just like do that? Yeah, I wonder why nobody else is interested in that whole journey. Why don't the marketing people come to me and say, look, we're in the beginning of the journey and we love that and we do all this stuff, but we're really concerned about how we move people further. Have you noticed, for instance, and now I'm not doing the voice anymore. I have noticed, for instance, that ROAS, so return on advertising spend, has the conversion rate as a constant. Yeah. And why is that? That's because people that work with ROAS as a metric, they don't have anything to do with the actual site. Ugh, that's over there.
Yep.
So they worry about how do we get return on our advertising, but the actual conversion is not their problem, and they don't know anything about that. That's just a number you multiply by. So they call people and go, "What's our conversion rate? I need it for the ROAS." But they quickly find out that if they do, for instance, a landing page campaign where they try different landing pages, or instead of sending it to the best products, or more so, and but build like a custom landing page, the ROAS go through the roof because now suddenly the multiplying factor, the conversion rate that increased, just really moved that needle. I think that's just a really good example of something that is just totally normal, but nobody bats. Is it bat? Nobody's batting any eyelids.
Yep. Yep. I'm going to steal your screen for a second. If
Sure.
anybody has any questions, you absolutely can ask, but or comments, but while you do, I'm going to remind everybody about the upcoming events, which you can find on the TLC website on the live events page, which is right here. So, reminder, TLC Happy Hour, sponsored by StatSig and Amplitude and Publicis Sapient, coming up next, August 27th, 5:30 to 7:30. It's in the Leo Burnett building, which is the same building that houses the Measure Camp Chicago. So if you've ever been to Measure Camp Chicago, it's in the same building. It's in the Lion Room, which is the largest room on the 5th floor. And it's going to be kind of Measure Camp style. We'll have a couple of round tables on conference style, happy hour, again, free parking, free food and drinks. Everything is complimentary, including the parking. You have to RSVP to get in the building. After that happy hour, the next two events are both Iqbal. On September 11th, Iqbal will make the case for small models, which is really cool. And after you attend that, the next week, he's going to do a RSVP required workshop on building your own AI tech stack with those small models. So if you miss the first webinar, it'll be recorded, so you'll have a time to watch it and then come to the workshop. But RSVP is required, but it's free. And then, of course, there's more talks in between. Will Critchlow will be coming in between. We just haven't updated the content for that. But like I said before, Experimentation Island is now Optimizers Conference. All-inclusive ticket for in-house folks starts at $15.95, $20.95 if you're an agency. And like I said, our first speakers, and that's listed here, but you can go to the Optimizers web conference to find out more. Okay, stop sharing. If I can.
That's cool. I'd love to go to the States to do that.
You
But
should.
I can't. I don't have.
Just
I
a
don't have what
short
it takes.
All right. Any final questions or thoughts, folks? Oh, Michael, when you start up with new client role, what are some good ways to map the disconnects to navigate?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Because so depends how the projects are started and who are you talking to. Because unfortunately for a lot of the projects I'm working in, I don't get to talk to C level. I'm further down the line, and so I have limited access to things like that, and that becomes a real battle. So what I do is like the team that I'm talking to, like my sort of like strategically or sort of like a org chart peers. Then we talk about these things. We go like, okay, but what do you know about where the traffic comes from, and is anyone else doing any testing? But I think that's the beginning is just reaching to sort of thinking outside, just like what we're doing on the side, and that's a good conversation starter just to go like, okay, but do you talk to those people, and what are your metrics, what are their metrics, and then maybe I give a few examples of like the disconnect. Typically, like something that with the traffic, and then we have a giggle about that, and then we can go like, okay, but maybe that's something we should. We have this task over here. We have to run a track or something, but this is something that we should revisit once in a while, and
Do you
in
see,
time, can we invite people to these meetings, or it could be
have
some
you,
of the classic stuff also, with the results, we have these results from these tests. Where do we share them? Is it Friday bar? Is it like a special place we send them? And I think all of those things that we normally talk about in sort of experimentation culture, they speak really well into the disconnect, because they are all about including more people and communicating more about it, and what do you do over there, and wow, we have these results, especially if it's a new zero track or a new experimentation track, because then people don't know. They just don't know what it is, and they don't know what they and we all know, if we can do great results in this and that, it's an eye opener for a lot of people in the organization. So I think I'm just trying to say, I think it comes natural with the discussions you have anyways, but you can consciously try to go a little bit, go out, in directions. I would start off with if you are where I am, I would start with the whole marketing thing. Where does traffic come from, and do you ever talk about aligning marketing with landing pages and what you tell people through the journey?
did you see Ruben's talk? I think he did it at Experimentation Elite, maybe, about the like relationship map.
Yeah, yeah, because he did the same talk at the Conversion Boost. He had his
Yeah,
whole sort of stakeholder approach.
love
Yeah,
that. The
yeah,
stakeholder map.
yeah. That's a
That's
that's a
been
great approach. I haven't done anything that sort of elaborate myself, but if you are, and I
trying
think
to
maybe.
change minds.
Yeah, yeah, and I think his example is also a great example of like, okay, you will need to have stakeholder management. You'll need to have to do that. So you might as well do it right away, do it well. And I think including, and was also very sort of psychological about who are these people and what do they want to achieve. But that's sort of almost the same as going like, what are their metrics, and what are they, what
That's
what are
what I
they
was
measured
thinking.
on?
You
And
showed the goal tree. If
exactly,
you
yeah,
have a situation where, like, I had a client who will go unnamed, where one part of the company felt very strongly that the company goal should be X, and the other part of the company felt the company
hmm,
goal should be Y. And I'm thinking goal tree, they both roll up to Z, and
yeah,
they
yeah,
just didn't understand the math. So once I showed them a goal tree, and that this team that was fighting for X and this team that was fighting for Y, if you put the math together, it
yeah,
was Z, and then helped everybody understand, and it was beautiful. So combining your goal tree with Ruben's relationship map, and then
yeah,
I was able to go around and like
yeah.
draw out everything. It was like magic. So it's
And it's
pretty cool.
interesting because the metric tree is not something that was invented yesterday. It's a very
No,
sort of,
it's
especially
I
within
forget which
data
book
collection,
it's in.
it's on
I think
page
it
one, probably.
I think it's in this one, right?
Most likely, it should be in a lot of, surely in a lot of analytics books, because it's all
Yeah.
about what's the relationship between them. But I at least is very surprised. I'm very surprised at how few companies ever open up that data. They may go, okay, the conversion rate needs to go up. I'm like, okay, are you sure that's the best metric? But because what if you just dump the prices? Conversion rate goes up. Is that what you mean? And then once you start opening up these metrics, just even saying, wait, conversion rate is a mixture of different metrics. Like, oh, okay. And people don't know, but I think that's also because data people or people that know a lot about these things, and I'm not talking about myself, they come later. So they come later in the growth of companies. So you have to have a certain size and a certain maturity before you have someone specifically working on that. And the biggest eye opener for me was when I started Impact. We had like 4 people doing tracking. I'm like, okay, so do these people look at analytics and go like, okay, so how's the business going? No, 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 no. They spend all their time doing tracking. So basically, all they're doing day in and day out is setting up tracking for like attribution, but no one actually looked into the data. I'm like, who does that? No one. And I don't. If I
We
was
have
a
all the
like a
data, but
data,
nobody could decide if the data they're collecting matters.
if I worked in that business, I would be so angry. I
Too
know
many
optimizers are
hippos.
angry, but data people must be the angriest people because they're like, yeah, so sad.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you, Ola.
Thank you
Really.
so much for your time. Appreciate it.
All
Bye
right. Bye
bye.
all.